Hello, everybody. Today's activity is designed to help us score points on the most important row of the rubric for performance task number 2, the individual written argument. In order for this activity to be effective, you need to already have at least one rough draft of your individual written argument. You can do this activity by yourself, or if you have a peer or a family member or a friend who can look over your paper and answer a set of very simple questions, this will be an effective activity for you. But if you do not already have a rough draft, this activity is not going to work for you. All right, let's move forward and take a look at the rubric for individual written argument. Uh, Rubric Row 1 is a unique one in terms of the rubric for the individual written argument in that it is a binary option. You either get the points or you do not get the points. While there are other rows of the rubric that have 3 performance levels, meaning low, medium, and high, this row of the rubric is binary. You either get a 0 or you get 5 points. So not only does that make it a challenge for us to make sure we get these points, something else to consider is at the AP reading, this row of the rubric is weighted more heavily than other rows of the rubric. Not all rows are equal. This is what the College Board refers to as a super row. This is one of those rows where the points are weighted more heavily and therefore can be the determining factor between receiving a 4 or a 5 or just receiving a 3 on your AP seminar exam. So it's very important that we put attention on this performance of this skill. So what is the skill? We need to be able to communicate that we were able to receive the stimulus materials from the College Board. We were able to identify a theme that connected at least 2 of those sources, and that we use that theme and one of those stimulus materials not only to develop our research question, but then intentionally use that stimulus material and thread it into our paper to support the development of an argument. Remember, individual written argument. So it's not enough to just say, here's the stimulus material I like the most, or here's the theme that I identified among the stimulus materials. We have to incorporate this throughout the development of our written argument. So let's look at the language of the rubric. For 0 points, the response does not incorporate any of the stimulus material, or at most, it is mentioned in only one sentence. Or the response includes a discussion of at least one of the stimulus materials. However, it does not contribute to the argument. That important word there, contribute to the argument. When I was reading for the individual written argument at the AP reading last year, I saw a lot of papers where the stimulus material or the theme was only briefly mentioned in the first paragraph or at the very end of the paper. What I need to be able to see in order to give points for this row of the rubric is that the stimulus material is a vital part of the argument. If I were to remove the sentences that reference the stimulus material or the theme, would the argument fall apart? If I could remove the sentence or sentences that reference the stimulus materials and the argument is the same, then you're going to get a 0 on this row of the rubric. Now let's take a look at what I need to do to earn the points. The response demonstrates the relevance of at least one of the stimulus materials to the argument by integrating it as a part of the response. For example, as providing relative context for the research question or as evidence to support relevant claims. Now, my suggestion to you would be, let's make an attempt to use it to develop relevant context for the research question as well as evidence to support the relevant claims. As we move forward, I'll communicate how to do that. All right, the first thing we need to focus on is which of the stimulus materials was the key to the development of our question. Now, as you begin going through your argument, keep in mind the AP reader should be able to easily identify what the key stimulus material is. So if I'm reading your paper and I'm spending 6 or 7 minutes going through your paper, at the end of it, I should be able to very clearly and obviously identify which of the stimulus materials was important to your work? If I can't even answer that question, meaning there is no specific deliberate reference to stimulus materials in this paper, then you cannot earn those points. So this should be very obvious. As you're going through it, keep this question in mind. Which of the stimulus materials serves as the essential source for your research question? And how has it served as inspiration for your work? Now, if you're working by yourself, just read over your rough draft and ask yourself, can you obviously answer this question? If it's in a digital format, why don't you use the highlighting function to highlight any reference to the stimulus material so you can at least see the title or the author clearly identified. If you're working with a peer, then swap with them, and each of you should read the work of your partner and then write out the answer on a piece of notebook paper. You should be able to clearly identify the stimulus material. After you've completed that part, you want to now communicate about the thematic connection. What is the thematic connection? How is the theme represented in both your key stimulus material and one other stimulus materials? Is that same theme also connected to your research question in a meaningful way? Would a reasonably intelligent person be able to easily understand the connections between your theme, the stimulus materials, and your research question? Each year, there is a very clear, very obvious set of themes that connect these sources. Now, you don't have to have the exact word. This isn't a gotcha, oh, you didn't say the exact word. For example, in the past, themes have been used such as work, but you could have also talked about labor, or you could have communicated about employment. Any of those would have satisfied the meaning for that year. Each year, there's a set of themes that are obvious that connect the sources. You don't have to have the exact wording in order to do it well. Now, as you begin writing out, keep in mind, once again, they should be able to obviously identify the thematic connection through your work. So continue your peer review or your self-review with your partner. Each of you should read the work and then write out the answer. I should be able to clearly identify what theme connects the sources, and I should be able to write out a clear explanation of how that theme is utilized into those sources. Now, a misconception alert here. Some people tend to overreact and they think, well, if I need to do this for at least 2 of the stimulus materials, it'll be better if I do it for 7 or 8 or all 7 of the materials or 5 or 6. You don't have enough room in your paper to do that. Try to limit yourself to just 2 of the stimulus materials. I promise you that will be more than enough if you do it correctly. Our next thing is to identify the research question and what is the scope of the research question? Is it narrow and clearly defined? Does your question have a specific focus which is logically connected to both the key stimulus material and the theme which connects to stimulus materials? Continue your peer review with the same partner. Each of you should read the work and then write out and answer these questions on a piece of notebook paper. Now, back to the idea a few years ago when the theme was labor or work. If I was going to talk about minimum wage and how it applies to the workforce, my scope and my focus is entirely too broad there. Yes, I've identified the theme, but my research question is not narrow and focused. The context is not clearly identified. Now, on the other hand, if I had identified an age group, the minimum wage impact on recent college graduates ages 20 or not college graduates because perhaps they wouldn't be using minimum wage, but recent high school graduates ages 18 to 22. So by identifying an age group, I've brought it in. Now, perhaps I could also make it even more focused by talking about specific industry, perhaps the service industry, and then perhaps looking at individual genders or individual locations. For example, if I were to reference Indiana or Kentucky or California, there I would have a scope and a focus of my question that was clearly identified and narrowly focused so it was easy for my peer to identify. And if my peer can identify it, then so can the AP reader. Once again, our reference point should be here. Can I easily answer all these questions? If I have to hunt for it in the paper or I can't obviously answer it after 1 or 2 readings of the paper, then it's not present and I know I need to go back and fix it. So what is our target? We want to score well on row 1. In order to do that, we need to bring all 3 elements together. Clear and obvious communication about the key stimulus material, a direct relationship between the key stimulus material and the thematic connection with at least one other source, and a clear and obvious connection between the key stimulus material and the thematic connection, and the development of a narrow and focused research question. And all 3 of these need to happen not just at the beginning of the paper, not tacked on at the end of the paper, but it needs to be referenced and threaded throughout the paper to develop and contribute to the argument. The paper should not be able to be understood without all 3 of these directly contributing to the argument. If, as you're going through your self-review or your peer review, you can't obviously answer these questions for any one of these 3 elements, you need to go back and make improvements to your paper. I hope you find this activity useful. It should help to guarantee that you score very well on the most important row of the rubric for performance task number 2. Good luck.